Right, welcome to communications class. Today we're going to be talking about ethics. And so we'll talk a little bit about what ethics are, how different people see ethics, and how that applies to communications. And so, how I would like you to start off is just thinking to yourself, what is communication ethics? And just kind of think about that question as we go through today's lesson. Because, like I mentioned, there's different ways people think about this, but ultimately it's going to be how you think about what the ethics of communication are. And so we're just going to start off with some examples of some definitions. So when we've talked about this before, that communication is the act or process of communicating, where we try to transmit facts, feelings, emotions, just ideas to someone else. So we're trying to have an exchange of communication, of thoughts, opinions, information. We do this either by writing, speaking, or like nonverbal cues, or literally writing out signs. So there's many different ways to communicate that we talked about. And in all of these, we're trying to transmit information to someone else and then receive information back. So now ethics is a system of moral principles. And so we're going to be talking about dealing with values that relate to human conduct. And so in some cases, this means right or wrong, good or bad, or why people do things. And we'll talk about how like there's different viewpoints. And we're not even going to get close to talking about all the different ways to think about this. We'll cover a few, but there's just way too many to try to cover. So if we smush those together, if we smush together communication and ethics, we're going to be talking about, just these rules that aren't necessarily written or anything. It's just the way we develop culturally, between what's right and wrong and what's moral when we're talking about communicating with someone, especially in an interpersonal communication, and how these ethics come up from that. So these are kind of like the cultural norms and values that we've developed over time in regards to communicating, transmitting information in between people. And so from there, it's also going to be about maintaining the correct balance between speaking, because communication isn't just about speaking, it's also about listening. So, kind of defining what's fair, in that exchange of information, acknowledging that other people may be fearful, and that there's also an emotional appeal to communication. So some people tend to be very charismatic, and that can be good sometimes, and that can be bad sometimes, because we as people we tend to place a lot of weight into how someone communicates. And so sometimes the person who doesn't communicate well may have great ideas, but they're not listened to, where sometimes someone may communicate very well, but their ideas are either not good or sometimes even dangerous. And, communication ethics also deals with the degree of criticism and praise. So, we definitely want to offer feedback to people, but the way we do it may not always be in the best manner. And so just deciding how to go best doing that. So when we think about communication ethics, we want to think about like responsible thinking. So are we thinking about our own effect on others? And we'll talk a lot about later about the freedom of speech, but here we're going to talk about the responsibility of speech, that you have a responsibility for the words and actions that you go and undertake, and decision making. So kind of like we said, if you're offering feedback, you're making a decision whether or not to say, I think there's room for improvement, or oh my goodness, that was horrible. So there's decision making within your ethical framework of communication and the development of relationships and communities. So your words are going to represent you. And how you present yourself is going to help with your relationship with others and in your community. So it's just going to form, now we use the term branding, but really you're always branding yourself. how do people view you? And that can be very important. So as we learn in other classes, going out in the community to help, but a lot of times your help might not be wanted if your communication conveys that you're not sincere, or even if you're somehow communicating that you're actually out to do harm. So keeping this all together relays to other what your ethics are in the form of communication. So now unethical communication threatens the quality of all communication. And when you're threatening others, whether intentionally or unintentionally, but you're communicating that threat, it really does affect the others individually and society as a whole. And so others may not trust you or others may not want you around. And so this is what we're really thinking about unethical communication. And we'll talk about it a little bit more in a bit of the different forms of unethical communication and the actions behind them. So ethical communication, if we try to break it down, you're really trying to advocate for truthfulness and accuracy. So if we think about a lot of what's going on now when people say fake news, as a communicator, you're trying to present what you view as the most accurate and truthful statements you can make. You're also there to endorse freedom of expression. And so, kind of like we talked about, communication isn't just about talking, it's about listening. And so, giving others the opportunity to express themselves, even when it's in contrast to what your beliefs or what makes you feel comfortable, giving others an opportunity to express their view. And we strive to understand and respect communicators before evaluating and responding to their messages. So this may be someone saying something where you're thinking, oh, I don't like this, but giving them a little chance to go ahead and fully explain to you what their point of view is before them talking about how you view things. So giving people a chance to explain, even if they make a mistake or do something wrong, giving an opportunity to say why they did the things or said the things they did. Now, we're also going to promote access to communication. And a lot of that in some of the videos that you watch talked about that, about how, you have big corporations that own news channels. So they're able to promote what they think is the truth. But then a lot of times people that don't have billions of dollars to own a news channel or own a newspaper don't get the same amount of access to present alternative ideas. And we really want to promote a communication of caring and mutual understanding. So again, giving someone an opportunity to not only speak, but the opportunity to be listened to and the opportunity to be understood. So when we are engaging with others, and even when they have contrary ideas or we may not like them, we present an environment where we're at least given respect and that we can listen to others, disagree, maybe not even like them, but that we're having this dialogue and an exchange of ideas. And then we are willing to condemn communication that degrades individuals and their humanity. It becomes very easy to hear something being said that is not appropriate and to just walk away. We kind of want to be leaders and take the opportunity and let people know, that that was not appropriate. There are better ways to express that idea, or the things you are saying are hurtful to others. A lot of times people don't want to step up, but it's trying to develop you as a leader in many aspects. It may be you may be the only one there to say that that isn't right. That's not appropriate. And so that's one of the things we want to pass on as a ethic of our communication. And we're just waiting for PowerPoint to do its thing. There we go. Good job, PowerPoint. So we also want to be committed to the courageous expression of personal convictions, especially when we're talking about fairness and justice. Now, this is going to look different to everyone because everyone's going to have a different perspective, and we talked about that in the last class, that we're really dealing with the diversity of a perspective. But what we're hoping is that you can develop, the courage to express your viewpoint on what fairness is and justice, and that you're willing to use your communication skills as they develop to establish who you are and what is appropriate in terms of how to treat you as a human, as well as those that to be, because not everybody feels comfortable doing this or gets training in how to do this. So being willing to help others find that voice and that courage for themselves and to advocate sharing information and opinions. So again, listening to other people's opinions, um, but also kind of challenging systems that say no, we're not gonna allow everybody. Being willing to be that voice that stands up and says no, everyone should have that opportunity. But doing this also while respecting privacy and confidentiality when it's appropriate, and to accept responsibility for the short and long term consequences of our communication and expect the same of others. And that's just simply like we're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to say things that we shouldn't, and just saying, "Oh, I apologize," or "Yeah, no, you're right. I shouldn't have said that." Just taking that responsibility, which a lot of people kind of don't or feel scared to. So having that courage to be wrong and to make mistakes, but to grow from that and to learn. And so now we're going to talk about some ethical frameworks, which is a fancy way of saying different ways people think. So different ways people are going to approach this ethics idea. And one of those is called utilitarian. The utilitarian ethics kind of focuses on what would be best for the majority. So what affects more people? And it really focuses on the consequences of the actions, what we do, rather as opposed to what we think or believe. And so this picture here is actually a long, famous and long used story, and it's called the trolley dilemma. So in this, we see a trolley and we it's assumed it's out of control. We cannot stop it, but we can switch the tracks. And so we have to make a decision. Do we switch it to the track that harms the one person or switch it to the track that harms five people? Now, in this scenario, that one person is actually your family member that you love. In the five-person situation, it's complete strangers. And so it from a utilitarian perspective, you switch the track to run over and kill the person you love because you would be saving five lives. And it's really kind of almost like a mathematical equation. Like it's more the greater number. We're serving the greater number, not what's most important to you. Now, this is not to say this is right or wrong. That's just one way to approach it. And this is what people who view the utilitarian viewpoint tend to think that we're really just trying to serve the most people possible. Now, virtue ethics, this is what we tend to think more of when we think of ethics. What are your beliefs? What do you think is virtuous? So it's concerned with moral character and places more weight on dignity of the individual and the humanity of caring for another. So in that trolley situation, if those were five, like say, murderers, and the one person was this person that's always out in the community doing great things, the utilitarians would still say the five should be saved. But people with virtue ethics would definitely prefer saving the person who's doing the good for the community rather than those that are doing harm. And so in this case, we're really talking about an emphasis on character as opposed to duty or consequence or rules. Like it's really concerned with like who is better. And keep in mind, like who is better is a judgment. So it's going to vary between person of who sees things differently. And so that brings us to situational or contextual ethics, which kind of places the utilitarian and the virtue models together and just says, look, before we really need to know what's going on. Wow, did I just mumble that? We really need to know what's going on. because there's no absolute, there's no really right or wrong. It's really about the context. And in that trolley situation, we just had numbers. And then I added, oh, this person is so and so, these people are so and so. So things don't kind of don't have as much weight until we really know what the situation is. There might be exceptions. There might be reasons to save the one over the five. And so that's really kind of taking into account that things aren't black and white, that there's variation, and then in those variation, there's going to be different perspectives depending on the person, depending on how they were raised, and just the many influences that causes different perspectives in a person's life. So now in unethical communication, we're going to talk about different forms of that. So now one is coercive. So coercive is like when you're trying to intimidate someone. So that we're considering that not the best way to have a really good relationship. Like intimidating, bullying someone is not good. Destructive. So that's backstabbing, really kind of gossiping so you can get your way, and really you're ultimately destroying relationships. Deceptive communication is just lying. So we're not telling the truth. We're going out there giving false information, and that can have really big consequences on people. So intrusive is eavesdropping. Just think about any time that you wanted, just kind of have a private conversation with someone. Someone was trying to intrude. That then again breaks that relationship. It doesn't improve things for everyone involved. And then there's secretive, and that's just not sharing information. And it seems really simple, but really not sharing information can be very harmful. We're not giving someone equal footing. We're not, we're just not being helpful and useful. And that kind of leads into manipulation, and that's pretty straightforward. Using our communication skills to create a false truth, so that we can guide others' actions, generally against what they would normally do. And so those are the different behaviors that we want to avoid. You'll hear me using the word relationship. Really, communication has a lot to establishing relationships. And so we want to avoid those actions in order to maintain good relationships. So freedom of expression, and we probably hear this a lot. Everyone say, I have the right to say what I want. And freedom of expression is a basic human right. Being able to seek and receive and impart information or have any opinion. And even it's even internationally recognized as a universal human right. And it's really used to seek answers and express opinions. And so having this freedom of expression it's a very important. Ethically, freedom of expression is often balanced against a society's need to maintain order. So just know that when we do express ourselves, there's a bit of creating chaos. And think about that when you run into someone that has an opposing opinion. It's not that they're right or you're right, but it does create conflict. And so there are a lot of people, especially those that are in power, that don't like freedom of expression because it creates chaos, usually against the order they're trying to impose. So freedom of expression really can create conflict, and there should be limits to expression, but really it's when it involves harm to others. And the example that's usually used is the whole yelling fire in a crowded building. And it just, people can get hurt, they can get trampled over. And so it's not just about being able to say anything you want. It's we go back to that point about decision making and using this freedom to make responsible decisions. And then again, people should refrain from using hate speech, offensive language, knowing the context and time to use appropriate speech. So, like, we generally try to refrain from using offensive language around children or in church, and it happens sometimes. And just having the awareness not to do that, to know when it's appropriate to use certain language and when it's not. And then again, kind of just refraining from using communication as a weapon. So if we know it's going to hurt someone, do we really want to use that language knowing it's going to hurt someone? And so, kind of again, referring back to the responsibility that we have with this freedom. So, we talked about mass communication last time. And mass communication, just as a reminder, is going to be anything that reaches a lot of people at the same time. So, social media, newspapers, magazines, TV, these are all forms of mass communication because they reach a large segment of people at the same time. And it's usually a mass produced message that's used by those different outlets. And there at the bottom, you can see newspapers, TV, books. Books are considered mass media. Um, Now, with these mass communication outlets, there's some ethics for them to observe, and they don't always get observed. So it's also good to be aware where the standard is, the ethics, but also to realize that it's not always followed. And so, what we expect from mass media communication channels is that they follow a sense of truth, not engaging in censorship, following laws, respecting privacy, maintaining an appropriateness, maintaining a sensitivity to other cultures, and maintaining respect, dignity, and privacy and well-being of a person. And as I read that list, there was probably on each one of those a time that you could think that there was a mass communication outlet that violated each one of those. So it's important to be aware that, yeah, those are the standards we hold them to, but that they're not always followed. Now, with ethical codes, now an ethical code is actually something that's written down. It's almost like a rule. A lot of times when we think of ethics, we think of, we're going to have to engage in conversation because ethics are not black and white. But with an ethical code, they're a guideline where it's written down and it's going to distinguish what is right and wrong instead of kind of leaving it up to an opinion or choice. And there's three levels. So there's the code of ethics, which is generally social issues and a lot of what we've been talking about, freedom of speech, not hindering someone else's speech. That would be a code of ethics. Now, code of conduct, you can think of like when you're an employee. It's these rules, like this is the way you're going to behave. And even in communication, a lot of employers will have a code of conduct saying that you're not allowed to post certain things on your social media page, that they will review your social media. But once you to gain employment, you have to say, yeah, no, I'm okay with that. And code of practice, which is really kind of leveled at, lawyers, certified public accountants, those that have to pass some kind of exam, and it says, look, this is what we're all going to agree to do when we're this professional doctors. Like there's certain rules that they're agreeing to be in that profession that they're agreeing to uphold. With doctors is to do no harm. So those are just like three levels on that. Now, just to talk about professionalism in general, when you get a job, you want to go ahead and make sure you're honest. Honesty is just a great way to pay off. Know when if someone finds out you're lying, it's not going to establish your time and your employer as going too well. You want to maintain confidentiality, not only because some certain professions require it, especially like medical and education, where we can't just release your information, but just in general, being able to safeguard a client's information, a coworker's information when they tell you something. These are important practices to keep. To give credit. If someone else came with an idea, just say, yeah, it was so and so's idea. It's not you're going to find that trying to take these shortcuts are short-term solutions, but in the long term, they're going to create problems, both with your relationships with coworkers and employers and clients, but also just your reputation. So these are ways to maintain a good reputation so people trust you. Again, free speech, not only with yours, but again, championing the ability of others to engage in free speech because not everybody has that inner force in them that allows them to speak freely or that training. Hopefully by the end of this class, you have a feeling that you can express yourself, um, and express yourself well so you don't fear expressing yourself. and courtesy, sensitivity to cultural values. If someone has a different way of thinking, especially because they're from a different country, being able to adjust, but also just as simple as giving someone the opportunity to speak, being quiet for 5 minutes so someone else can share their idea is just a great path to professionalism. And so we're going to wrap it up here. And I wanted to wrap things up with what's called the four-way test of the Rotary Club International. And the Rotary Club International is a great organization. They do a lot of volunteer work. If you're looking for volunteer work, it might be an organization you want to look into. But they have what's called the four-way test. And it's, when you're about to think, say, or do, consider these four items. And this kind of just, I think, wraps up everything we talked about today pretty cleanly. Think about, is what I'm about to say, is it the truth? What I'm about to say, is it fair to all concerned? What I'm about to say, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And the words that are about to come out of my mouth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? And this is just a, good test that before you say something to think about these items, to make sure your communications are ethical, but also just the best things to be said at any given moment. So have yourself a great day, and I'll talk to you soon.